Hi, my name is Andy Park, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to work in the comic book industry for the first 10 years of my career, and I made a transition to be a concept artist in the video game industry. And for the past 10 years, I've been working in the Marvel Studios visual development department, designing characters, and helping to come up with a general look and feel of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You're watching a 3-part series on how to paint Marvel gods. This is part 2, Loki. So in part 1 of this video series, you watched me paint the God of Thunder, Thor, played by Chris Hemsworth. I hope you got something out of it. So here I wanted to show the basic forms, take away all the little details and all the nuances and break it down to its essential forms. The box-like form that I talked about in the first video that Chris Hemsworth has, the features, the very idyllic superhero male look, overall shape, and how it contrasts to a character like Tom Hiddleston, Loki. So here you can see how his face has a very box-like shape. If you break it down to its most simplest form, it's a box. And Loki, who has a little bit more of a triangular shape. So here you can see the contrast. So I could even take something like this, where I'll take Thor and I'll turn this into Loki. So using the liquify tool, I'm going to just start pushing and pulling the forms around, and you're going to see how I can transform something as boxy and ideal in forms when it comes to all the stereotypes you think of when it comes to a male superhero. And I can start bringing in the features, so a pointier chin, bringing in the features more towards the center of the face. He's got a much smaller mouth. His eyebrows tend to tilt upward towards the middle, and his neck won't be as thick and muscular as Thor. So here you can see the back and forth. I'm going from Thor to Loki, and knowing these contrasts and differences will help me as I'm painting Loki. So let's start this painting. Just like in the first video, I'm using the standard chalk brush that comes with Photoshop, and I'm starting to sketch out the forms, looking at reference of Loki from Thor Ragnarok, and I'm trying to find the placement of the features. I'm not thinking about clean lines or trying to make anything beautiful. It's the same thing. It's the same approach I would use when trying to paint traditionally, whether it be an oil paint, watercolor, acrylic, or doing a charcoal drawing. I'm trying to find all the landmarks. I'm studying the reference throughout this video tutorial. That's what I'm doing. I'm going back and forth from studying the reference. I'm measuring in my mind, using my eye to measure landmarks, placement, spacing things out, and never being beholden to the lines that I put down. That's one of the big things that I would advise when it comes to digital painting, trying to get likenesses, is not to be beholden to the lines that you put down. You put them down because this is what you think it looks like at this moment. You're measuring, you're doing the best that you can, but throughout the painting process, you're going to find that you've made mistakes, or you've measured it wrong, or now that you're painting other parts, you need to adjust. So I'm always adjusting. And just like before, I'm trying to get to color as soon as possible. It's the way I like to approach paintings. Instead of spending so much time doing a clean line drawing, which is a valid way to approach painting, but I tend to like to get to color and figuring out the drawing, the painting, all at the same time using brush strokes. So I just darkened in the original lay-in line layer with about a mid-saturated, quite warm orange hue, and I'm mapping out shadows, general shadows, using the colors. You can see in the bottom right hand corner, I'm using the HSB, which is the hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'm going to be moving around, picking colors, changing the hue, changing the saturation, finding the right temperature for the color. And as I do that, more and more paint and colors will be put onto the painting, and from there I can start color picking as well. I can color pick right from the canvas. As I put down a brush stroke, it blends essentially because of the opacity of the brush strokes, and then I can color pick to kind of get nuanced colors, tones, values. And here I'm starting to put in more of the darker shapes, trying to find the placement of his eyes, make it a little bit more red, knowing that in these areas there's a lot of blood vessels, making sure that in shadow areas that it doesn't just get dark, but that there's actually color, and a lot of times in the shadows it'll be even more saturated in the color. So being aware of that. And I mentioned in the last video as well that the face tends to have a color band from a range from more of a yellow tone at the top of the head, the forehead area, and as it goes to the eyes, to the middle band, to the nose, it gets a little bit more red. And then as it gets lower to the mouth and chin, it gets a little cooler, a little bluer. And it's all very nuanced, because as it stays overall, the face is a warm tone, but within the warms, the reds, the oranges, you can get cooler and warmer depending on where you slide the color in the hue saturation from the color window on the bottom right. So that's why I really like using that color window, because you can really, just like I would with real paint, you're always thinking about, okay, here I need to make it less saturated and then bring more saturation, so you add the appropriate color to make it more saturated, and then at the same time you're thinking about the value. So I'm adding some general darks in the hair, in the shadow area of the neck. In this reference that I'm using, there's not a whole big range of colors, because the reference that I'm using is from the scene where Thor and Loki first encounter Hela. And in that scene, they're in a very overcast outdoor area on a seaside cliff, on a cliffside, and it's overcast. So the sun is not blasting, so you don't get a lot of really warms. You're gonna get a lot of cools because of this. The source of light is really coming from the sky, so there's a lot of blues and cools. So this painting is not gonna have as many of the strong warms that the one that Thor had, which was more of an indoor lit scenario. So this one's gonna have a little bit less of a color range, as you'll see as this painting progresses, but it's good to kind of practice all types of lighting scenarios, So this one, knowing that it's gonna stay, even though it's warm overall, it's more on the cool, grayed out side of the warm range, if that makes any sense. Versus if you compare and contrast to the Thor painting, there's a lot more stronger warms and reds and oranges, and that you'll see those kind of nuances. This one's gonna feel a little bit more, it's not monochromatic, but a little bit more towards that style of painting. So much of it is studying the reference, knowing that the lighting in this one, there's not going to be real strong reds and oranges, because the light source doesn't call for that, because majority of the light is coming from an overcast sky, which has a lot of cools and blues. So now I'm adding the darks in his hair, doing an undertone. Again, knowing that his hair is it's pretty black, but this is going to be an undertone. And as you can see in the HSB color picker, like the colors are staying on the left side of the saturation portion. It doesn't go very often to the right side of the HSB, because I'm being cognizant of staying in more of a cool, or maybe not cool, but more of a desaturated color palette. But despite that, you can still, everything's relative. It's all relationships. So if you see in his ear, the darks in his ear, like you see how red that is. But if you remember when I color picked or chose that color, it was still, I think, maybe just about a 60% saturation. So still fairly desaturated, but that's probably the most saturated area in the painting. So it's actually quite desaturated, but because things around it are so desaturated, it appears warmer. So everything is in relationship to the stuff around it, and you can use that to your advantage when you're painting. If you want to have something that looks saturated, but the overall painting is not saturated, it doesn't mean you have to go all the way to the right side of the saturation portion of the HSB color picker. So that's something just to keep in mind. Here I'm moving around the painting, adding details, and just like with the Thor painting that I was doing, a lot of times I'm painting, looking at the reference, adding details, thinking about the values and colors. And a lot of times what happens is, because of my approach and doing it this way, where I'm painting and figuring out and I'm changing things, I'm well aware that a lot of times the likeness is not 100% there. Again, I'm sharing you this one method of painting that I do very often, but it's not the only method that I'll do, and it's not the only method that I would suggest, because a lot of times it is to your advantage to spend the time doing a very detailed line drawing to get the likeness down like 100%, and then from there all you have to worry about is the painting. But this is just the approach that I like, because it feels more like real painting, and at the end of the day, that's what I love doing. I love the feel of paint, I love the look of paintings, and that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm not trying to go for a photoreal, like I'm trying to fool you. I want the viewer to know and to feel that this is a painting, and to appreciate the brushstrokes. So as I was mentioning, and as I did in the Thor painting, now after I have a good amount of detail in there, I realize, and I've always realized, that the likeness is not totally there yet. So now that's why I flip the canvas and I'm liquefying and I'm moving things around. I'm studying the reference and I'm trying to push and pull things to get a closer likeness to Loki, Tom Hiddleston, and moving around, not trying to stay in one area, because I'm trying to look at the overall image and studying, measuring. And that's why in my paintings you won't see me zoom in very often, because at this distance I can see the overall much better. If once I zoom in even one level closer, like all of a sudden I'm not looking at the overall picture, I start looking at features or details, and at this point I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I get this to look more and more like Tom? So that's why I'm zoomed out. So the liquefy tool is an amazing tool, and I know a lot of artists these days, both young and veterans, are using the iPad and Procreate to do their art. And I haven't used it really, but I know it has this kind of feature too, where it does a liquefy, which is one of the greatest things, because you can always change things on the fly. versus if this was a real painting, I'd literally have to paint over everything. So I flip it over again. Flipping back and forth is great because you want to change the orientation of how you're seeing something to see your mistakes. You flip it and then you see more things that need fixing. So there's times when I'll paint, for an hour in one view, and then I'll flip it the other way, and then there's been times where I've even forgotten which way is the right orientation because I flip so often. It's just a good thing to practice, because the more you do that, the more you'll figure out that you'll figure out your mistakes. So here I'm realizing that there was just too much head and side of his face, so I lassoed and copied that whole portion. Now I'm lassoing and copying the whole bottom portion from his nose up, and I pushed it up a little bit, making adjustments slowly, starting to look a little bit more like him. I know it's not totally there yet, but that's part of the painting process, which I find fun because it's like a puzzle and you're trying to figure it out. It's kind of a mystery. It's definitely a mystery, but it's at least you know what you need to do to solve it. You just have to do the work. You just need to continue going at it, studying, and eventually, there's a confidence that I'm gonna get there. I just need to put in the time and study it. So starting to get there. I know part of him looking like Loki, he had brown hair all this time, so I needed to change that. So I used a color layer and I just graded out, got rid of the warmth and made it more of a gray tone so that I can put in the dark. So he has his black, beautiful locks that he has in the movies. So he's already starting to feel a little better, more like Loki at least. I can still tell that there's still work that I need to do on the face to kind of get it to where I'd like it. So adding some details in his costume. And this whole time I'm just using the chalk brush. For both of these tutorials, the Thor and Loki, I've been using 99% of the times I've been using the chalk brush, and then mainly at the end for some glazing or for some color adjustments, then I would use a circle brush and essentially using it as an airbrush. So again, I'm copying, pasting big portions that I noticed that need to be pushed and pulled in different areas, the distance between the nose and the mouth, the forehead being pulled in more, and side of his face, raising that up because he's got a very big forehead, and then pulling it in ever so slightly, because that's one of the features, one of the things about Tom, all the features are really squished in towards more of the center of the face. He's got a really small mouth, very small lips. He's got pretty good sized ear, thinner neck, and pointier chin. And I think this is starting to look like Tom. So now that I'm liking pretty much what this looks like, just gonna start adding little details, colors, color picking from within the painting now that I have a lot of nuanced colors in there, in that limited range. And now I can add more of that, the fun part, which is the highlights. So going from a quite desaturated color, but still in the warm, I'm adding some highlights. And then from here on this side, adding some reflective light. This is more from the sky. The other side, his left side, the right side of the painting, the really strong highlights, that is from the sun, which is covered by clouds, but that's why that part will be the brightest. And then essentially the rest of the sky is like a big soft box. So that's where he'll get those highlights, which I intentionally try to get them really cooler than the other side that has more of a, where the sun would be, so it would be a little bit warmer, all these areas. So just pushing and pulling, flipping to see, going back and forth, still noticing little things like still the distance between his mouth and nose needs to be a little lower and maybe a little wider. And then I'll turn on and off layers just to see the difference, to see if I like those changes. And adding some more details. And it's always fun to be able to add a very painterly backdrop and adding a nuanced Loki green. That's his color. That's what really sells and makes it feel like this character. He owns green. So I did a very desaturated green. Look at how desaturated that color is in the HSP. And continuing to add little details. And here, I'm using the airbrush, and I'll use a soft light layer so that I can just add big washes of color and value, adding darks, lights, but as well as adding glazes of color. And I'll even add those to the face to see what it does. I'll try it out. So I'll cool out the left side of his face, and adding even the bright side of his face. I'll cool that up. Overall, adding this light blue, mid-level blue desaturated here and there. And I tried adding a little bit of warms here and there, especially in the areas that would grab warm areas, like the nose, mouth, nose, eyes. Just very subtle thing, just to bring some life. So he was looking a little dead with all the blues. And then here I'll do an overall levels to bring up the contrast. And there it is, seeing them side by side, the finished paintings. You see Thor and Loki. Well, I hope you enjoyed part 2 of this 3-part series on how to paint Marvel gods. Please check out part 3 coming soon as we wrap everything up and have a little bit of fun. So please subscribe, like, share, and hit the notification button so you'll be informed when the 3rd part goes live. And please leave a comment or question so I can address them in the comment section or in a future video. And until next time, take care.